The Duke of Exeter introduced the rack to Britain in 1447, but Spanish inquisitors refined it into winter science by the 1500s. England's Tower of London housed the famous Duke of Exeter's daughter, but Toledo's Castillo de San Servando operated 3 racks simultaneously during peak winter torture seasons. Women accused of heresy found themselves strapped to its unforgiving frozen surface during January and February when the Inquisition's dockets were fullest. The progression of injury followed predictable patterns intensified by cold ligaments stretched to their limits, while frozen joints separating with audible pops that echoed in stone chambers, shoulders dislocating first, then hips, elbows, and knees. Vertebrae pulled apart, compressing spinal nerves and sending lightning bolts of agony through the trunk, while winter cold kept victims conscious through trauma that would cause shock-induced unconsciousness in warmer months. At extreme extension in the frozen chambers, muscles tore from bone with sounds victims reported hearing their own bodies breaking in the January cold. For women, the rack carried additional horrors during winter sessions. Pregnant victims lost their children from the combination of stretching and hypothermia. The position left breasts and genitals exposed in the frozen air to additional abuse. Some interrogators burned sensitive areas with heated implements while victims remained stretched and helpless. The contrast between frozen body and burning iron, creating agony beyond description. The rack could be administered repeatedly because it didn't destroy the body outright. A woman could be stretched in the morning, returned to her frozen cell, then brought back that afternoon for another session. But not all Inquisition torture attacked the body through stretching and drowning. Some devices targeted specific anatomy with surgical precision, designed to destroy the parts of women's bodies that patriarchal authority found most threatening. The iron spider, more commonly known as the breast ripper, consisted of 4 sharp claws attached to a handle constructed from iron or bronze. Each prong curved and sharpened to pierce deeply into flesh, and in winter those prongs were heated until they glowed red in braziers that provided the only warmth in the torture chambers. Women convicted of adultery, accused of being too seductive, charged with heresy, or suspected of refusing sexual relations with their husbands faced the breast ripper during winter months when public executions and torture sessions drew the largest crowds to Toledo's Plaza Mayor. The procedure unfolded with public cruelty calculated for maximum impact during freezing January mornings. The woman was stripped and restrained in the plaza, often tied to a post, while crowds gathered their breath, fogging in the winter air. The executioner heated the iron claws in a brazier until they glowed red, the contrast between frozen morning air and red-hot metal visible to the entire crowd. Then he applied them to the breast. The heated metal seared skin on contact, the winter cold making the burn more shocking to frozen tissue. The claws dug deep, and then came the tearing. The executioner pulled back violently, ripping breast tissue away from the chest wall, while steam rose from the wounds in the January cold. In documented cases from Toledo and Seville during the 1580s, the breast was sometimes completely removed in winter public spectacles. Women who survived carried visible marks of their supposed shame, unable to nurse children, living with chronic pain, bearing scars that society intended as permanent records of their crimes. The winter cold prevented immediate death from bleeding, but ensured that wounds would become infected in the days following, as victims were returned to freezing cells without medical treatment. Records from Germanic regions and France contain detailed accounts of the breast ripper's use during witch trial hysteria of the 15th through 17th centuries, with winter months showing the highest usage rates. Yet even this public mutilation wasn't the final word in torture designed specifically for women. Another device awaited those accused of witchcraft, the Judas cradle, also called the judgment chair, designed to inflict agony continuously for hours or even days in the frozen dungeons. The device consisted of a pyramid-shaped seat, its apex sharpened to a point, mounted on a wooden or metal frame. The victim was suspended above this point, by ropes in the freezing air, then gradually lowered onto it. Women accused of witchcraft during the European witch hunts faced the Judas chair with particular frequency during winter months. The Spanish Inquisition documented its use in Toledo and Valladolid tribunals, as did Germanic and Italian courts. The device's genius from the torturer's perspective lay in its versatility intensified by seasonal cold. The point could be positioned beneath the anus, the vagina, or the tailbone, while January cold made muscles contract, involuntarily increasing the pressure. The process began with the accused stripped naked nudity itself, serving as torture in freezing chambers. Hoisted above the chair by ropes attached to wrists, the woman was positioned so the pyramid's point sat directly beneath her while she shivered violently from hypothermia. Then came the lowering inch by terrible inch in the frozen air. The sharpened apex began its penetration while cold made tissue less elastic and more prone to tearing. The torture was prolonged deliberately. Torturers could adjust the ropes to increase or decrease pressure, could leave victims suspended for hours in the winter cold, their body weight alone driving the point deeper. Sleep became impossible. The body's natural movements from shivering in the cold caused the point to shift and penetrate further. Winter sessions documented in Toledo archives lasted up to 3 days, with victims kept in the frozen chamber continuously. The damage accumulated horrifically in the cold. The pointed apex tore through skin muscle and eventually internal organs, while hypothermia prevented the shock that would bring merciful unconsciousness. Rectal or vaginal insertion led to perforated intestines, ruptured bladder, septic peritonitis, all while winter cold kept victims conscious through trauma that should have killed them. Even when the point was positioned beneath the tailbone, victims suffered crushed vertebrae and nerve destruction that left survivors permanently paralyzed, unable to feel their legs, even after the frozen February air gave way to spring warmth. And infection was inevitable in the unheated chambers. The devices were rarely cleaned between victims' blood and bodily fluids from previous prisoners contaminated the surface, freezing overnight and thawing during the next session. Open wounds became breeding grounds for bacteria, and many victims died, not from immediate trauma, but from septic shock days later in their frozen cells. But not all Inquisition punishment occurred in underground chambers. The most public and devastating method was reserved for those the Inquisition condemned as unrepentant heretics, burning at the stake during the Great Winter Auto de Fe ceremonies. The flames rose high against frozen morning skies as crowds gathered close in the bitter cold, seeking warmth from the pyres as much as witnessing justice. For centuries, fire served as both executioner and purifier, transforming flesh and bone to ash while supposedly cleansing souls of heresy. Women bore the brunt with devastating frequency, particularly during the witch trials that consumed Europe from the 15th through 18th centuries. In the German city of Double, Auersberg alone, 900 people burned between 1623 and 1631, predominantly women accused of witchcraft, during a period when winter executions were scheduled weekly. The condemned woman would be bound to a wooden stake in the frozen plaza, sometimes seated on a small platform. Green wood was often used deliberately because it burned more slowly even in winter, prolonging death, while crowds stamped their feet against the cold. Dry kindling surrounded her feet, and when torches were lit in the January morning, smoke rose into the frozen air. Initial burns caused excruciating pain as nerve endings fired their final signals. As flames climbed higher, smoke inhalation might offer mercy through unconsciousness, though not always quickly enough in the winter air where smoke dispersed more slowly in cold, keeping victims conscious longer. Death could take anywhere from several minutes to half an hour, depending on wind and temperature. Historical records reveal staggering numbers intensified during winter months. England's Marian persecutions under Queen Mary, I saw 280 religious dissenters burned in just 5 years, with winter executions drawing the largest crowds. The Spanish Inquisition burned fewer victims than secular courts, but the practice remained widespread. The rationale shifted with the era. Medieval authorities believed fire prevented the condemned from rising at Judgment Day, while later witch hunters claimed flames destroyed demonic corruption within the body. Elvira del Campo survived her January 1568 torture session in Toledo. The trial transcript records her confession after the sixth jar of ice water, her reconciliation to the church, her sentence of public penance wearing the San Benito the yellow penitential garment through Toledo's winter streets for 2 years. She lived until 1574, but her daughter's testimony describes a mother forever changed by that frozen morning in the Castillo de San Servando. The Spanish Inquisition operated for 356 years, from 1478 until its final abolition in 1834. During that time, thousands of women, their names mostly lost except for fragments like Elvira's preserved trial transcript, endured systematic torture justified as religious purification. The underground chambers still exist beneath Toledo's Castillo de San Servando, now a tourist hostel where visitors sleep above rooms where the toca apparatus was stored, where the rack's rollers turned, where women drowned in ice water and confessed to crimes they never committed. The devices themselves are displayed in Spanish museums. The Museo de la Inquisición in Santillana del Mar preserves examples of the strappado pulleys, the judgment chair's pyramid seat, the iron spider's curved claws. These aren't replicas, but actual instruments used during winter torture sessions across 3 centuries. If you want more historical reality about how institutions weaponized suffering, subscribe to Medieval Survival Skills. We're just getting started revealing what actually happened behind the legends.